Let's be honest, we were in the brace position.
Yeah.
But it looks like you've come crawling back, claiming essentially political asylum.
But it is a complete coup because these people are not elected. They now have control of data. They have control of money. They have control of like, the purse strings. He's just sitting on Twitter, just unilaterally chatting to his right-wing fans, going, what should I cancel next? What should I stop payments to? Sorry, who the are you?
This is not an actual workable alternative to a broken system. It is a morbid symptom of its decline and an accelerant.
I want to take it one step further, make it even darker.
Oh, great.
I think even if people were to suffer the consequences, nothing would change because you know what? We have social media today, which can literally make up, down, black, white, hot, cold. I'm Mehdi Hasan.
I'm Owen Jones.
And we are Two Outspoken. Owen, good to see you.
Great to see you. Well, it looks like you've already, we're 2 weeks in. Let's be honest. We were in the brace position.
Yeah.
But it looks like you've come crawling back, claiming essentially political asylum.
We are in London.
Given how bleak
we are in
got.
London.
Sorry
Owen and I
clear.
are in the UK. And have I fled the US for the UK?
Well, it seems that way. Do you think,
No.
are they going to let you back in? I don't know. How does it work?
I'm a US citizen, but apparently that doesn't mean anything anymore.
No, I mean, especially...
Apparently you can now deport US criminals, US citizen criminals to foreign countries, according to Trump. That's
Well,
the
also,
latest-
Elon Musk
latest
now
one.
has all your data, doesn't he?
That is
true?
worrying. That is
Yeah.
worrying. We're meeting shortly after I left the US, and it was a crazy last weekend, for those of you who are not following, in the UK and abroad. We basically had a coup in the United States where
Just
an
a coup attack.
unelected billionaire and a bunch of kids who were not old enough to rent a car went into various government departments and just took them over, like physically. You know, we talk about like data, they're in your data. No, physically went in, past security, threatened the security officials with men with guns, with US Marshals, went into USAID, went into the Treasury Department, took physical control of the richest, most powerful government in the world.
And Democratic Congress people then waltzed in, tried to, elected
They've
politicians.
since tried to, but, you know,
Didn't-
they don't have any power
No.
right now. And yeah, it's very hard to get people worked up, Owen, about stuff like this, because here I am in the UK. I was just having some dinner with some friends last night, trying to explain to them this story, which I am very hard to get people worked up about. They've taken control of the Treasury payment system.
It's
right?
not even on people's radar, though. I think that's the problem.
But also, when we talk about authoritarianism, you and I talked about this before the election. I've been screaming about this for years. The second Trump term will be an authoritarian Trump term. There will be, you know, neo-fascism. People are going to try and take over the government, end democracy. But people don't visualize the end of democracy as the Tesla dude and a bunch of kids taking over the Treasury direct payment system. That's just not how they visualize it. But it is a complete coup because these people are not elected. They now have control of data. They have control of money. They have control of like, the purse strings. He's just sitting on Twitter, just unilaterally chatting to his right-wing fans, going, what should I cancel next? What should I stop payments to? Sorry, who the fuck are you?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because people's image of democracy dying is basically, I don't know, it's like a Latin American putsch, isn't it? It's tanks on the street. It's
Guy on a balcony.
Yeah, the presidential palace getting bombed a bit.
yeah.
And then, you know, the Generalissimo doing a photo shoot with his arms crossed, wearing sunglasses, flanked by some other generals. That's the gist, isn't it?
Yeah.
But, you know, if we look at other... I mean, I think Russia's quite a good example. In Russia, they could go, well, we've got 6 political parties represented in our Duma. We've got 20 registered political parties in the country.
Vladimir Putin stands an election.
See? We've got... and, you know, there are more people at the moment being arrested for political reasons than any time since Joseph Stalin. So I think we can all agree that that's not a democracy. Hungary is the playbook for these people. I think... I mean, not just Hungary. I think they look at... They're picking and choosing. But Hungary is an example of, you know, they had a political party, Fidesz. It's dude... Orban, not dude. His guy who runs it used to call himself a liberal. He used to be vice chair of the Liberal International, don't you know? And then it radicalized in power. And what it did is it didn't put, you know, people, you know, firing squads, shooting people, 3 people in prison. It just got rid of democracy by attrition behind closed doors.
Erosion.
Exactly. And you get sort of what we call democratic culture. I mean, look, you know, I've got a critique of, you know, democracy, capitalism. Under capitalism, the wealthy have all, you know, huge amounts of power. There was a study a decade ago about the US being an oligarchy,
Yeah, it
not
was
a
a
democracy.
Princeton study, yeah.
Exactly. But there's always caveats. But there's this democratic culture, and that has just gone. That has just been completely eroded. Democratic norms, how a democracy functions, what is, you know, the opposition's legitimate. And what they did in Hungary, as well as, you know, supporters of Orban buying up newspapers, for example, so they didn't... It wasn't by diktat. They didn't take over newspapers. They just got friendly businessmen to do it for them. Is the opposition were portrayed as stooges of foreign powers of George Soros, who is this anti-Semitic trope, the puppet master. And
on Soros, just very funny. There was a very good tweet this week from Jane Coaston of the Times, who said basically it wasn't that people were opposed to the imaginary George Soros running everything. It's just they wanted a George Soros of their own.
just their
Elon
own.
Musk is what they thought Soros was.
Well, I mean, that's it. It's on steroids. I mean, it's not. Projection doesn't even give it. It's justice.
Jealousy.
Yeah, I know. It's like
jealousy of something that doesn't exist. So in Hungary, for example, they created this idea of Soros the boogeyman.
Yeah, and what they did then is, they just kept pushing an open door.
Yeah. Because
the European Union, which Hungary is a member of, it does all this bluster and rhetoric, but Orban's just shrugged it all off. And what they did is they escalated it. So, for example, they introduced, I can't remember, it's called Defence of National Sovereignty Act or something like that, which then investigates NGOs and media organisations for having foreign funding, and then uses that to, either you can, massive fines to bankrupt them or even lock them up.
Yeah.
And I think you can just see what, is going to happen in the US, or what is happening in the US.
I mean, they've gone after USAID, specifically the aid department, because the argument being that they fund all these things at home and abroad. When the members of Congress that you mentioned turned up, Jim McGovern, Ilhan Omar and others turned up outside to protest this week, Musk tweeted the video and said, these corrupt politicians are here because they get money from USAID. Well, they don't, obviously. They vote to fund USAID. And then there's this argument that USAID funds foreign criminals and Marxist elements and anti-American groups.
Where's my USA dosh?
Where is it?
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
We have to check they'll be checking all the accounts. But this is the kind of insanity. And it is, as you say, the playbook is Hungary. Trump doesn't exist in a vacuum. I've been trying to explain this to people for a long time, right? He is sui generis as a person. There's no one like Donald Trump. Viktor Orban is not Donald Trump.
No.
Narendra Modi is not Donald Trump. President Erdogan of Turkey is not Donald Trump. Vladimir Putin is not Donald Trump. As people, right? He is very unique, weird individual, narcissistic, insecure, ignorant, etc. I could go all day. But the phenomenon of Trumpism and what he's pushing as a playbook, as a governing playbook, as an operating money, as you say, does exist abroad, isn't just an American phenomenon. It is in India, it is in Turkey, it is in Russia, it is in Hungary.
It was Bolsonaro as well. It's the
also Brazil, to an extent, Milei in Argentina. This is all over the place. And the Orban one in particular they love because he's the kind of white Christian guy who, as you say, pretends to be a Democrat, so still can be called elected, but is doing exactly what they want in terms of controlling universities, going after LGBTQ communities, going after Muslim migrants, and cracking down on the media. It's interesting what you mentioned about the media, because if you look at Musk, and I know you've also written about Mark Zuckerberg as well recently in The Guardian. I saw your piece on Orban and Zuckerberg. These people have not had the Trump FBI or secret police go into their buildings and say, hey, you better bow the knee to us. They've just done it, the anticipatory obedience. They've bowed the knee and they've sucked up to him. And of course, Musk is a donor and a member of the government essentially now. So that's his takeover of the media. It didn't require, not a shot fired, right? And it's what they did in India. There's no independent media in the mainstream media left in India. Even NDTV, which was the last great bastion of TV journalism in India, was taken over by a billionaire ally of Modi. In Turkey, many of the newspapers taken over by rich friends of Erdogan. In Hungary, all the billionaires took over. So yeah, the playbook is there. We'd be blind if we didn't.
Well, yeah, because social media is where so many Americans get their news. 30% of Americans, Facebook alone.
Most Republicans, yeah.
Well, there we go, exactly. So, but I mean, you can see, with Mark Zuckerberg, it's quite interesting. You say that, but then in Donald Trump's recent book, he says that if Mark Zuckerberg intervenes again as he sees it politically in the election, then he will spend the rest of his life in jail. Now, if we were talking about Russia and it was a media mogul who'd been threatened in that way and then bowed the knee accordingly, we wouldn't hesitate in calling that out for what it is. And I think what you can see, I mean, look, it's a multi-pronged offensive, isn't it? I mean, look at Jeff Bezos. The Washington Post pulled its endorsement of Kamala Harris. He's now done this ridiculous documentary, massive for Melania.
Yeah, he's paid $40 million.
40 million.
And he turned up at the inauguration, of course, to sit in a better seat than much of Trump's cabinet.
And then gave $1 million quid.
So when you look at that coterie of billionaires who are controlling the media and information system, it is Hungary on steroids, India on steroids, Turkey on steroids, Russia on steroids. There's never been anything like it, right? These are the most influential human beings in the history of the planet in terms of the Mark Zuckerberg has more control over what we see, hear, watch, or understand than any human being in history. I hate to give him that compliment, but he is one of the most influential men to ever have walked planet Earth.
And you get,
and he's fallen in line behind Donald Trump.
And it's a multi-pronged offensive, isn't it? Because you get actually the threat of something legal happening, maybe an investigation to tax. They don't know. That Mark Zuckerberg clearly thought that was a risk. He thought something was going to happen.
But also with Zuckerberg, it was an excuse for him to believe, say and do what he
of course. I mean, tech bro. This is the thing. There's this idea of the tech bros being this liberal bastion, when actually incipient fascism and tech bros are definitely not mutually exclusive.
They also think they're the masters of the universe. So another guy who says he is one and empowers them to be one, it's great useful. Interesting you mentioned Hungary. Hungary didn't have a dollar billionaire until 2014 when one of Orban's allies became a billionaire. He's now the richest man in the country. I think he's worth 3.2 billion. And guess how he got a lot of his money? Government contracts. Elon Musk, a man who gets billions from government contracts, and his company just went up in value since the election, I believe $200 billion. So the guy spent around $200 billion plus on funding the Republicans and Trump. They win, and his net worth goes up over $200 billion already. Not a bad deal.
And it's interesting.
Not a bad deal.
Because it's right-wing populism is about the people versus the elite, whilst then just nakedly encapsulating crony gangster capitalism in its most naked, shameless form possible.
As someone who has written extensively about the working class, right, you have in the UK and abroad, I know. How do you deal with that? I know in the US, there's a very thing about the American dream and looking up to the rich guy and saying, I can be that person, and the fetishization of wealth and billionaires. Globally, though, and in the UK and the US, how do we deal with the fact that, quote unquote, working class voters have no problem voting for parties that are plutocratic?
Well, I think sometimes I generalise because actually a lot of the
especially non-white voters.
Exactly. You just what people often do is they just exclude entire sections of the working class. And in Britain, what they do is they go, it's someone in their 50s who lives in a small town who's socially conservative and a white man. And young delivery drivers in London are just suddenly not the working class, even though they're privately renting, they're living in precarious conditions, and they're not voting generally for the likes of Nigel Farage, are they? I think what has happened is social progress has ground to a halt. So after the financial crash, the idea of kind of rising living standards, just and the public realm improving, your kids having a better life than you, that just ended. Yeah, and even the kind of, if you look at New Labour and Blairism, that kind of model, I objected to it, but they had at least an offer, which was, we're going to keep Thatcherism, which obviously I didn't like, but we'll try and humanise it. We got all these tax revenues coming from the city of London, and then that just stopped in 2008, and they never came up with anything else. And if you've got no social progress, if in America living standards have stagnated, or wages for male workers in particular, for a huge amount of time, then you either offer a alternative to that economic model, which means challenging the rich vested elites and redistributing wealth and power. But if you don't do that, then people will A, conclude democracy doesn't deliver, and they will go off democracy altogether. And B, their anger at their conditions will be diverted at other targets, migrants, Muslims, and so on. And I think that's what's happened in the US. That's what's happened in Britain. It's not happened everywhere. I think it's interesting. You're right. There's kind of,
but the gravitating towards billionaires and people clearly ripping you off is something that the left has grappled with for a while. After the financial crisis, people are like, oh, this is a moment for the left. But history teaches us that when you have financial crises and global recessions, it's actually a moment for the far right.
Well, that's what happened in the 30s, let's be honest.
Yeah, and even now in the US, where there was this whole thing about, and you and I talked about it after the election, we had a very good debate in DC about, was it economic anxiety? Was it the economy that drove Biden's defeat? And, there's an argument about how good or strong the US economy was. Even if you accept the US economy is not as good as it should have been for everyone in it, the solution was not Donald Trump and Elon Musk.
No.
And yet they won more votes.
No, but I think, you're right, but I think, isn't this the point about you need a cut-through vision, don't you?
Yeah.
And what Trumpism offers is a coherent vision, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
It has a clear analysis, and it has a clear set of toxic solutions.
100%.
But if you don't have that, then you don't get cut through.
I'm so glad you said that, because actually I was talking to Naomi Klein recently on Unshocked, and she made exactly the same point, that MAGA has a narrative, right? At the end of it may not be a narrative we like, but it's a very clear narrative about taking back your country and owning the libs and empowering certain people and disempowering others. And there isn't, and they have a story about the past. It's bullshit, but they have a story. And
also
the liberal left, both the liberal part of it and the left part of it, doesn't have a story.
No, I mean, a lot of it as well is you're competing for scarce resources. So because we don't have this age of progress anymore, so people feel that, their lives are more insecure, and then they feel like it's easy to say you're competing with scarce resources and this competitor isn't legitimate. And your life would be better if there were less people fighting for these scarce resources. So we'll just get rid of these illegitimate competitors.
And you have to ignore the fact as who actually controls the resource. There's that great cartoon of the Rupert Murdoch with the guys. He's got a pile of cookies. There's a construction guy and a migrant, and the construction guy's got one. The migrant's got one cookie. He goes, "Hey, that guy's taken all your cookies," right? And it's that sense of look over there. LBJ's famous of picking of pockets analogy as well. It's a real problem. But let me ask you this: we're in the UK. This is a place that didn't go quote unquote right wing, or did it? Last year in the general election, it's one part of the West where the right wing party lost at a time. Anti-incumbency is a huge factor, of course. Dare I ask Owen Jones, sitting here in London, has the UK Labour Party got a vision or a narrative that other socially democratic centre-left parties can look at in this age of precariousness and uncertainty and say that's the way to beat the Musks and the Orbans and the Trumps?
Let's just spell out how things are going, shall we, for the Labour government. 1, Nigel Farage's reform is ahead in the polls. 2,
ahead of the Labour Party and the Conservative
Party. Number 1. 2, Keir Starmer is now more unpopular than his predecessor Rishi Sunak was at the very lowest point of his premiership.
And he's only 7 months into it.
Yeah, only 7 months in. Rishi Sunak was absolutely wiped out. And more to the point, his own staff are briefing 2 Times journalists, which is a Murdoch stable, that he is not really the train driver. He's someone they say that they've put in front of what is a driverless, Docklands Light Railway is a driverless train, and they say they've put him at the front of it and made him pretend that he thinks he's actually the train driver. What's actually happened there is quite interesting because it almost made me feel sorry for Keir Starmer. And then I realised that he appointed this backstabbing rabble. He is in fact someone in charge of his own destiny in theory, but they are scapegoating him. Because what they're trying to do is go the reason, because they've looked at it's all fallen apart. Yes. It's spectacular. The things that this government are known for is kicking pensioners because they got rid of this benefit payment for the winter for pensioners to keep their houses warm. They're known for taking freebies off rich donors, and they're known for sucking demand out the economy by laying the foundations for cuts, by going on about how doom and gloom the economy was. And they've got to come up with a scapegoat. So they're coming up with this guy, and they're saying because he's not really a true believer.
Scapegoating the leader of the party, the prime minister who took them to victory.
The guy they put there and who they are paid to work for, and they're already publicly humiliating him, which is kind of funny. I'm not going to lie, but the reason is what they're doing is they see themselves as the imitate. I mean, they're trying to imitate New Labour in his pomp, and they're intellectual and political minnows in comparison. Yeah. But New Labour wasn't trying to imitate. So I don't like New Labour. It wasn't trying to imitate something. It was an original project.
In the new book that says this line about him being in charge of a driverless train, it's from 2 Times journalists, I believe. Yeah.
Very well connected. Extremely well connected.
I read there was a quote. I can't remember off the top of my head. There's a quote from Tony Blair in there. Even Blair says, "I don't know what Keir Starmer stands for."
Well, I mean,
that's pretty ironic.
But I know
Tony Blair is saying.
But New Labour did have a model, which was we're gonna, as I said, we'll take tax revenues and we'll use that to improve public services. Basically, and that could happen when there was growth. Yes. And that was a mirage because it was a model that wasn't sustainable. It was based on the financial sector being strong and dominant and house prices, and that went pop and it never recovered. And they never came up with anything else. So rather than a bit of self-reflection about the fact their political model doesn't actually work anymore, they're saying it's this useless guy. We just need someone else.
Is there someone in the shadows? Do you see Keir Starmer being deposed? I mean, for the international audience watching this show, and they only know the UK because of Liz Truss and the lettuce. They know Tories went through 4 prime ministers of whatever it was, crazy amount of short time. Is Labour going to do the same?
Britain's had about a third of its post-war prime ministers since 2016. It's ridiculous. I think it's 50-50 if Keir Starmer survives by the end of the year. I'm not joking.
Really?
I'm absolutely not joking because he is now more unpopular than any prime minister at this point. And you can't include Liz Truss because she was beaten by lettuce.
She didn't
make it this long.
But anyone who's made it this long, no one's been this unpopular 7 months in.
And people sometimes look back and go, well, I mean, Margaret Thatcher wasn't this unpopular by this point, but she did get very unpopular, but she clawed it back. And the problem with that is she did, but she had a vision.
Falklands War.
She did have the Falklands War, and she did have, lots of other advantages. But she also did clearly have a vision, which I thought was toxic and wrecked the country. But it was a very clear vision. And this guy has absolutely nothing. But there isn't a vision for this. That's the problem. This is why we talk about the option being you either have an alternative, which is about challenging the economic model and offering an alternative, or we're going to end up with fascism. And I'm afraid Britain's a case in point, because here they only won by fluke, by the way, because they got 33.7% of the vote.
We talked about that last time.
On the lowest adult. Yeah, so come on.
When you take out the entire turnout, etc., it's, what is it, one in something? How many Brits?
It was about 17% of eligible voters voted for them. So, and they got 2/3 of the seats. But that's like a Jenga tower. It could just topple very easily. And
as I think it was Harold Wilson who said, oppositions don't win elections, governments lose them. I think last year is a classic example of that. That was the Tories losing.
But and this I was told in the election by a senior Labour figure, I'll put it that way, who said a lot of people think Keir Starmer's got this secret plan. Their team has a secret plan in a drawer somewhere, and it will just come out. And he said, there is no plan. and the problem is they still don't have one, because what would their plan be? That's the problem. They don't
want to do anything that might sound Corbynite.
Well, that's how they define themselves. As
anti, right? So they can't then concede and go, well, let's nationalise something, or let's spend money on something.
I honestly think they spend a lot of the time thinking, would this annoy the left? And if it would, let's do it. And I genuinely think, I know these people. I unfortunately had to spend too much time with them.
The US evangelical community have a line, right? WWJD, what would Jesus do? And I feel like Labour may have one here. What would Jeremy do? WWJD, and do the opposite.
Yeah, what would Jeremy not want to do?
We'll do the opposite.
But the thing is, they're a case in point, because in 2015, when Jeremy Corbyn became leader, why did that happen? It seemed a very unlikely event from the outset, and it's because that lot were intellectually and politically bankrupt. Their cupboard was empty, but they had years in exile after that to work up a plan, and they never came up with one. So what they had to do instead is
just undermine Corbyn.
Well, they think Keir Starmer's a yes man, and they put him in there to because they thought they could deceive the Labour membership, which they did, into thinking he's actually a secret lefty. And then as soon as he's in power, just get rid of all those left-wing policies in favour of nothing. That's the problem. And they still don't have anything.
They've purged people, right? They've purged Labour MPs.
Yeah, they mean including Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah,
and even people like Zara Sultana who don't sign on to child benefit cuts or whatever.
They voted to get rid of Tory cuts to benefits, which drive hundreds of thousands of children into poverty, and they purged them, and 7 of them. But that's the point. I think these people.
Were you surprised to see Reform take the lead this week?
No, not at all. No, I think that, and I'm afraid it will go higher.
I'm old enough. I haven't lived in the UK for a decade, as you know. When I lived here, Nigel Farage was a kind of irritant, a nuisance, a permanent presence on BBC Question Time and various BBC shows. There is no Nigel Farage without the BBC. Let's be honest about that. But no one took him seriously as a politician. He couldn't even win a seat in Parliament. He'd run, 6, 7 times, lost multiple times. Here we are in 2025. He's finally won a seat in Parliament, multiple seats for his party. I think they have 5 seats in Parliament. And as you say, this week, for the first time, they're polling ahead of the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. That is a big shift in British politics.
In the betting markets, and there's a big caveat there,
yes.
But in the betting markets, he is the favourite to be Prime Minister in 2029. And
can you go, again, I know it's been a while since I've lived in a parliamentary democracy. Can you go from 5 seats in Parliament to a majority?
Absolutely. This just shows how politics is in flux.
Yes.
Because in 2019, the Tories won an 80-seat majority.
That's a good point.
And then 5 years later, they got absolutely decimated and got their worst result in the history of democracy.
So the swings are crazy right now.
Exactly. And you can see that.
People are, as you say, torn, unstable, precarious, angry.
Well, there was no
looking for anyone who can give them.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a loyal voter anymore, and that's the thing with the Labour Party, because who's their core vote now? I mean, the problem is
it's interesting because I'm in the US where partisanship is still massive, right?
Yeah.
It comes down to, are you a Republican or Democrat? Tiny sliver of swing voters in 3 states.
You basically got 40% core Democrats, 40% core Republicans,
roughly.
And then something in the middle where they. But even that's probably.
But here you're saying people can swing to a brand new party that did not exist.
100%.
5-6 years. When was Reform created? Less than 5-6 years ago.
Well, it does depend. It's the first past the post system,
yes.
So it depends how the cookie crumbles. In theory, in Britain, you could win 20% of the vote and not win a single seat.
To be fair to Reform, correct me if I'm wrong, they won more votes than the Lib Dems, but got fewer seats.
Yeah, in fact, very good point. The Lib Dems got just over 12%. They got over 14%. the Lib Dems got dozens of seats.
Yeah.
Because it's about, you've got to concentrate your vote in particular seats in order to win. If you just spread your vote out
This
evenly,
is
then
deeply
you don't.
depressing, Owen. We were talking about fascism and Hungary, and I said, let's talk about the UK, one place where the right didn't win. And 8 months into the right not winning, you're telling me they're about to win again, but a worse version, a more far-right version.
Well, because the Tories as well have
also
embraced Trumpism. So you've got...
It is crazy the Trumpist embraced by the British Conservative Party.
It's
At the inauguration in DC, you had Liz Truss wandering around the city in a red MAGA hat, looking ridiculous. You had Suella Braverman.
She used to be a Liberal Democrat, just people aware. She started off as a Liberal Democrat. Her parents are lefties. Yeah. She was a Liberal Democrat who used to be doing speeches denouncing the monarchy.
She was a Cameroonite moderniser.
She was on the A-list of David Cameron's...
moderniser, which
he's
was all
got a lot of
compassionate
transfer for that guy.
And now she's like... And then there's Suella Braverman turned up in Trump's DC
yeah,
for the
and
inauguration.
I think
they've in the first Trump term, Tories tried to keep some distance, if memory serves me correctly.
And I think...
Not anymore.
No.
They've fully embraced Trumpism.
Kemi Badenoch, she's useless. I don't think she won't last. She's the leader.
We're just writing off everyone today. You're just giving
political
obits to everyone from Owen Jones today.
That's it. I spoke to this, I don't know, very well-connected individual figure, international figure. And he did make the point that whatever you think about different leaders...
Was it George Soros?
It was actually. How do you know that? He's the one who pays all my wages.
I thought that was USAID.
But they overlap. He pointed out whatever you think. If you go back to the 80s or 90s, you look at forget what you think about these figures.
Yeah,
François Mitterrand.
They were serious figures.
Yeah, but Margaret Thatcher.
100%.
Or Helmut Kohl.
My dad says this to me.
But
I always laugh, but it's true.
No, and you look at in British politics, they're like, I describe them as mid-managers in a mid-level clothing label. They are just awful.
I'm going to throw a name out that some people might not like on the left and the right. Gordon Brown. Whatever you think about Gordon Brown,
Very
no one thinks he's not a substantive figure with a vision which you could agree with or not agree with, with a backstory, with a hinterland.
Yeah, have nothing. These were people who thought through their ideas, read lots of books, were orators. These people are mid-level. They're mid-managers at a mid-brand clothing label. I think, but if you look at what's happened with the Tories, Kemi Badenoch is not good. I don't think she'll end up, but her likely successor, I've just forgotten his name. Someone else, basically,
Jenrick.
Yes, Robert Jenrick. Robert Jenrick, who is
the man who said we should criminalize people saying God is great. Muslims who say Allah.
He will try and outflank. He will become Tory leader. I think that's very likely.
He said Pakistanis bring medieval customs.
But he will outflank Farage. He will go on an arms race with Farage and a Dutch auction about who can be the most extreme. That's what will happen. And there's every chance they will end up in coalition with each other, because I think what you could end up with is a hung parliament.
Do you think Robert Jenrick could be like, let's free Tommy Robinson as part of his platform? Wouldn't surprise me.
Look, Liz Truss, who used to be the Prime Minister, she shared a platform with Steve Bannon where he was praising Tommy Robinson, and she didn't say a thing to object to that. Yeah, what you're going to see is we'll see how that pans out, because Tommy Robinson in Britain is an extremely unpopular, toxic figure. So I think there are limits, which is why Nigel Farage had to distance himself from him when Elon Musk.
Things change fast, sadly. Nigel Farage was not a popular figure in Britain. As I said, 10 years ago, if I'd said to you Nigel Farage would be Prime Minister, you would have laughed in my face.
No, I know.
But things change fast.
It's alarming because we had race fights.
And our media, unfortunately, let's talk about the media. The media fails.
They built him up. They absolutely...
there's no Nigel Farage about the BBC. I think he's got the record of second highest appearance on Question Time.
Which is a flagship discussion show.
I think he has number one, number two, somewhere up the top three. He's definitely in there.
They built him up, and he's very good at... he's a very good communicator. And he's brilliant at outmaneuvering his interview. He's slippery. He's got this genial kind of approach. He's more substantial than Donald Trump, for example, for a start. And he taps into this certain type of Englishness, which appeals to a certain type of voter. I think the problem is, the reason he has grown in stature is because the other leaders have declined in stature. So actually, it's quite easy now to look like a political titan. He's a great survivor. He's been around for ages. He's stuck to his message. And he's managed to detoxify himself, which is ridiculous.
To further depress us, let me defy good old Richard Godwin and say, if you go back to the Nazi period in the early 30s, and the Atlantic ran a very interesting but depressing timeline of Hitler's first, 90 days, and how he used a constitutional means to undermine the German constitution, a lot of that was a gap in the market, right? People like Hitler and other fascists throughout history have been able to thrive because mainstream parties cleared the ground for them, left a gap. Nature abhors a vacuum.
Well, if we're going to look back at those examples, Mussolini, who put him in power? the Italian Liberal Party,
Yep.
who put Hitler in power, the centre-right establishment.
Yes.
They thought to themselves, we can moderate this guy. We
Yep.
can work.
Meanwhile,
with
the
him.
New York Times ran pieces saying he's a bit of a clown. Don't take him seriously.
They did, yeah. They just because he was seen as a slightly ridiculous, comic.
Nigel Farage, a little bit comic.
Well,
Elon Musk, Donald Trump.
Let's not get sued. I imagine we get sued for Nigel Farage. We're not. Obviously, I would never describe him as a Hitler in the making. But I think,
Never.
I mean, with all,
Not at all. Just to be clear.
just to be very clear,
Just to be clear. We're just saying he's funny independently of anything else.
But I do. But I mean, look, history doesn't often repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And the precedent is, back then people concluded democracy doesn't deliver the goods.
Yeah.
And that was because the economic system wasn't delivering the goods. But people don't divorce the two. And unless you have something else which explains, no, don't blame the fact that you've got freedom and you're able to decide who rules over you. Blame the fact you've got a system which is very good for those who make money, but actually is rigged against your interests. Then you end up with people going, well, actually, if we have a strong man in charge, and yes, actually, maybe we should blame X or Y minority for our conditions, then you get the way for a right-wing authoritarian takeover, and that is what's happening.
But to go back to the start of our discussion, the problem is it's hard to get people riled up or worked up. This is what I found personally talking about kind of the rise of authoritarianism and fascism, because as you said at the start, people have a certain view of the South American general in the balcony and the tanks on the streets, or Adolf Hitler and Nazi salutes. Not that anyone's doing Nazi salutes right now. Of course.
No, imagine.
So people have this visual image of like what fascism looks like, and actually, fascism, authoritarianism, extremism looks very different today. And you have Elon Musk sitting down in conversation with the leader of the AfD in Germany, and the leader of the AfD in Germany is a white lesbian woman who's in a partnership with a non-white woman. So therefore, well, then she can't be right-wing, right? This is a Musk. She can't be right-wing.
She's too extreme even for Marine Le Pen, the far-right leader in France.
But on paper, it's very easy for Elon Musk to go, what are you talking about? Look at the leader of the AfD. This is a right-wing person. Even though when they have a conversation, Owen, by the way, going back to the 1930s, they claim that Nazis were actually communists and socialists.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what's actually more depressing, I think? This is my theory.
Go on. Depress us further as we wrap.
Well, the US was in a state in the 1970s. The economy was a mess, stagflation. The US had been defeated in a foreign war. Vietnam, after tens of thousands had been killed and huge numbers of others maimed, huge trauma for American society. Violent crime surged much higher than it is today. There were riots across the United States, massive racist backlash against the civil rights movement. But there was no Trump, was there? There wasn't any Trump-like figure. In fact, you ended up with Nixon and Reagan, who were nothing like Trump. George Wallace, who was the segregationist,
got beaten badly.
He got 13% in 1968. I think the reason for that is because a lot of Americans would have looked at someone like Trump and thought, 25, 30 years ago, a lot of our boys were fighting the Nazis and Italian fascists, and this guy's got too much of a whiff of a Mussolini, too much of a hint of a Hitler. And I think the stigma's gone. I mean, we're now in the 80th year since the end of World War II, when we can all celebrate how we finally defeated the far right forever and they never came back. Well, I mean, that's the problem. I mean, I honestly think the stigma's gone. And in my darker moments, I think the only way this is going to end is if what happened last time is people were forced to suffer the consequences of their own choices and get out of the system.
But here's I want to take it one step further, make it even darker.
Oh, great.
I think even if people were to suffer the consequences, nothing would change, because you know what? We have social media today, which can literally make up, down, black, white, hot, cold. So take climate change, for instance, a story that for many years some of us on the left were saying, wait till people feel it, wait till people start dying, wait till it's happening. It's not a future random abstract issue. Then they'll take it seriously. Well, we just had mad wildfires in LA, in the United States, and the right, Elon Musk's platform leading the way, were able to make it about forest management and reservoirs and fire hydrants and DEI and women firefighters. And they did it. No one's talking about climate change in the US. It did not dominate the news coverage of LA. So even when people are literally 1 million people are being evacuated from their houses and dozens of people are dying and there's fires all across our TV screens, even then they can go, no, don't look over there. Look over here.
No, and don't get me wrong, it will be very successful for a long time, and they will just turn down. It's again, when we're talking about, they're not going to, in the past, just you lock up all your opponents. They'll just turn down the volume on their opponents. The algorithm will turn people down. But
And actually,
it will
that's
run
why
out of road. It will run out of road because.
Go on, is that your hopeful moment? I'm going to start wrapping this up. We've been depressing everyone. Let's go and run out of road. Give us some optimism. Light at the end of the tunnel.
I just think this model of politics is never going to make people's lives actually better. Their living standards are not going to improve. The conditions that they live in their communities are not going to improve. And
what if they're fine with the Musk bread and circuses?
Well, I mean, if we want to literally give up on humanity, then yes, fine. Let's take a gun and shoot ourselves in the head. But if we're not going to give up entirely on humanity, I think some people will do that, fine. But I think after a while, the collision between what is my life and what is a life for my children, what's the future
and
going
what
to be
are
for my
these
children?
billionaires
what they
promising us and dangling? And
even if they're dripping relentless poison into people's ears and eyes and all the rest of it, this is not an actual workable alternative to a broken system. It is a morbid symptom of its decline and an accelerant. And I think this economic system, it ran out of road in 2008. That's my view. It ran out of road in 2008. And unfortunately, the left didn't manage yet to come up with a workable alternative. And at the moment, you just get this decaying corpse, which is incipient fascism. But I don't think it's going to last. But, it doesn't.
That's what we need.
It doesn't going to last.
I'm stopping it now before we depress our viewers even more. You don't think it's going to last. I don't think it's going to last. I just don't know when that moment's going to be.
And also, we have the climate emergency looming over, so we don't really have time.
We don't have time. We have time. Well, although we have 2026 midterms next year.
Good point, yeah.
Can the Democrats turn things around in my country where I am right now by November 2026? If you ask me right now, I'd say no fucking way. But there's still time. I'm hoping for a miracle at home. And look, Harold Wilson, to quote Harold Wilson twice in one show, a week is a long time in politics. 2 weeks of the Trump presidency already feel
Lenin said something similar as well. Sometimes there are days where...
Of course you have to take centre left and go further left. Wow. Of course, Owen, that's you.
He said it better.
2 weeks feels like 2 years, right?
Yeah. And that's
2
the thing.
weeks of Trump.
If you said 20 years
ago,
a
lot could happen.
10 years ago, would you have imagined we would be in the current situation we're in? I don't think you would have done. So I think
10 weeks ago, I'd have imagined that a bunch of kids would have control of my social security number because they've just violated lots of the US laws and the Constitution.
Yeah, so we don't know. I mean, look, in 10 years' time, we might plausibly both be in prison, but we might not. Who knows? We might be. Or
in 10 weeks' time, keep watching Two Outspoken. We could be talking about a great story about how these people are all on the run and on the defensive.
Absolutely. It could be a great left-wing revolution that's just taken place. Who knows?
Before I wrap up, I must point out that you are wearing a rather snazzy hoodie. You are one of the first people to ever wear Zeteo merchandise, Owen Jones. You're a very special...
If there was a graph of my dopamine levels in my brain when I saw this and put it on, it would have been like... It was so
That's
exciting.
how much we love you, Owen. This is the value we place on you at Zeteo, that we were rolling out merch. We said, let's give one to Owen now.
It's so snug. It feels like I'm getting hugged by Zeteo. Yeah, it's beautiful.
I love it.
It's
the socialists doing capitalism.
It's right. I mean, I'm going to pour lots of stuff all over it, so maybe
we'll give you a different colour. I'm wearing black. We've got merch rolling out. Zeteo is a real media company. It's a real thing. Ever since we launched this company, people keep asking me, when are you going to have merch? Because apparently it doesn't matter what content you have. It doesn't matter what awards your podcast wins.
No.
It's, do you have merch? Well, we have merch. Go to shop.zeteo.com and get your merch and support us in many ways. Owen, it's been a pleasure. I'm Mehdi Hasan.
I'm Owen Jones.
And we were Two Outspoken.